Happy Mushoku Mondays, everybody. Welcome back to yet another trek through the Mushoku Tensei Jobless Reincarnation novel series. Honestly, we were supposed to be starting Volume 12 this week, but I wanted to go back. I really did want to go back and start back from Volume 1 and really start to re-dig through things and see if there's certain things that I may have missed way back here that now, looking back, I can sort of spot. I thought it'd be a really cool thing to start over from Volume 1. I'm just joking. Volume 12. We are on Volume 12 of Mushoku Tensei Jobless Reincarnation. Celebrate. It's celebrating time. So amazing to finally jump into Volume 12 after so many people will not shut up about it. Yes, I'm talking about you. If you're watching this, you know I'm talking about you. But no. It was a lot of people saying, don't listen to people, don't let them overhype it. And I'm like, dude, I'm hyped for every single volume of this series by this point. So you can't hype me more than I already am. Now, I'll be let down by certain volumes just because they're not as great as other volumes, but that doesn't mean that any particular one's going to be a letdown for me. I'm still going to love it. Even at the slower points, I still eat it up because there's so much character development and there's so much little details within the world itself. And yes, already with this volume, I was super angry at Chapter 1. I have read up to the end of Chapter 3. I really badly want to finish this Mushoku Monday so I can go read Chapter 4, because for those that know, no. But it's been a great ride so far. Man, every single line of these chapters so far has been something I'm probably going to dig into. So, with that said, let's see if we can get through 3 chapters. Everybody's saying I'm going to do a chapter per video. We'll see. But I'm going to hope we can do 3 chapters, but that's the aim, but it all comes down to how much we actually record. As per usual, I'm trying to pace it well, not give me too much to edit, but one warning, we do have the transition of the seasons coming up here soon for anime, and that's usually a really extremely busy time for me. I'm hoping that I can pre-record some stuff so that I have no delays, because as per usual, Mushoku Monday is my priority. So I will make sure that every Monday we have a Mushoku Monday. But I don't want to harm myself, so we're gonna fill things out. But I'll keep you guys posted. But with that said, let's jump into Chapter 1 of Volume 12 of Mushoku Tensei: Arrival. The labyrinth city of Rappan was one of a kind. It sat in the midst of a vast desert, trapped within an enormous white cage, specifically bones from a long-dead behemoth. Ribs alone enough to encase the entire city. At one point, it was nothing more than a small oasis, but the remains of a behemoth transformed it. It was now surrounded by a shocking number of labyrinths, making it more alluring for adventurers. Due to many arriving to get rich quick, the city was full of happy endings and, of course, because labyrinths, tragedies. Currently sitting as the largest and most prominent city in Begaric Continent. During their journeys, Rudeus did start to talk to Galban a lot more, and this was due to their formation kind of shifting. Galban loved to brag. His stories were incredible. Self-flattering, yes, with questionable veracity, but they were easy to enjoy with suspended disbelief. He noted that when the great hero, second-generation North god Kalman, visited the land, he and his companions defeated a behemoth that was rampaging through the desert. They feasted on some of its meat and left the rest of its remains to rot, leaving what they were seeing now. Bones refusing to decay, standing testament to the passage of time. This land apparently had some sort of connection to the North god Kalman. Rudeus knew of some tales of him, but never anything about slaying a behemoth. The North god had apparently bested an immortal demon king and an enormous dragon, so maybe defeating a monster with colossal amounts of HP was his hobby. Ants were amongst the numerous monsters that feasted on the behemoth, and they were the cause of the city's numerous labyrinths. This is super cool. When monsters devour other monsters that are stronger than they are, Galban said that they were given birth to powerful offspring. Those mutant ants dug countless nests, and the nests were all turned into labyrinths. Over time, the insects began to die. The nests mutated, and thus labyrinths were born. Rudeus accepted this, but questioned the aspect of eating stronger monsters and giving birth to more powerful offspring. He figured it was some sort of folktale. If it were true, people of the Demon Continent would be much stronger. Monsters may be an exception to the rule, but he didn't buy it. But then he considered, with the higher rate of stronger people like Badigadi and Kishirika being born there, with monsters being mutated versions of animals, it would make sense that people would give birth to such mutants. Then he wondered, since he had eaten so much monster meat, what kind of child would be born? Would they suddenly declare themselves the emperor of the demon world? It's interesting. But no, I'm getting ahead of myself. But the whole aspect of the labyrinths being created makes so much sense, and it's so super interesting. It makes sense why the city of Ripon is a labyrinth city. Like, this place is covered with labyrinths. That's what makes it so popular. People are coming there for these labyrinths. And they're talking about how there's so many of them. It makes sense that if this big beast died, and these ants came over and ate it, and then they started kind of burrowing down in the ground, they would die, and it would create some sort of distortion. Because again, these labyrinths are technically like, they're described as living beings. So there has to be some sort of oddity about them that's sort of turning them from just being a cave or a hole into a labyrinth. And it would make sense that something of some sort of powerful strength, something that has consumed something of powerful strength, going down there and dying, the mana and whatnot within it might change the ecosystem itself from just a cave to an actual labyrinth. Sort of like putting a heart within it, and then suddenly it starts beating. It's super interesting, and again, it technically explains why there's so many labyrinths there. I think they even indicated way back here in Volume 7 this idea that when they had the whole war happening, and you had this king that was going through and burrowing all these holes to get inside of the human strongholds, that some of that stuff ended up turning into dungeons. What's to say they can't turn into labyrinths as well? What if all of these labyrinths were sort of created by that and something dying within it? It sort of starts to hit on the origins of what a labyrinth actually is. And again, is another sign of this writer being so good at not just presenting something, but explaining it too. But yeah, it would be really funny to kind of find out that there is some sort of connection to consuming meat. That, I mean, technically with like Rajured, he's extremely powerful. And what has he been doing? He's been traveling this whole time, killing and eating monster meat. It's not too much of a stretch here. And yes, technically, I would argue that if you compared somebody on the Demon Continent to somebody in the Central Continent, they're going to be much more powerful. And now you could probably say that's to an argument of just the environment that they live in, they have to become strong. But compared to a lot of the people on the Central Continent, they're probably much, much stronger. Much more durable, gone through so much more. They're made of something thicker. In the city, magic items were churned out in droves. Magical implements and armor flew off the shelf. No matter how many magical crystals there were, they never had enough. Everything of certain quality sold at high prices. As long as you could navigate the desert, it was a merchant's dream come true. And yes, they were talking about how this was how Gul'bon was making his money. Of course, this was something that few could do. Most would find better profits and safer travel if they were in the Central Continent. But this wasn't something that Rudeus was going to point out to Gul'bon. It's like, dude, you know it's much more safer if you just trade over here. They parted ways with Gul'bon after arriving. Their goodbyes were short, but Rudeus learned a lot from them. And they had taken care of him. Yes, things were strained between them, but in the end, he hoped that there was no ill will. Yes, mostly around Carmelita, but they sort of kind of indicated an aspect with Bali Bottom as well. It was time to search for Geese, or Paul. They decided to head straight to the Adventure Guild's, luggage in tow. He kind of figured that once they met them, they're going to probably want to stay with them anyways. On their way, he spotted a shop with an owner in an outfit straight out of Aladdin, selling lamps made of metal and pots with curious patterns. You could probably summon a snake if you played a flute. Approaching the Adventure Guild, he's seen many dressed in familiar adventure garbs. Again, most of this area is just locals, but once they got to the Adventure Guild, that's when you start seeing the people that come from the outside of the Beggaric Continent, the ones that are coming here to get rich and go to labyrinths. That's when you finally see them. All had battle-worn faces, probably S-rank specializing in labyrinth diving. This isn't your normal adventurers. You're not gonna have some normal adventurer just kind of travel over here and try to take on a labyrinth. The Adventure Guild was carved out of an enormous boulder, likely with magic. He could tell because he could probably do something similar, though not something this complex. The vibe inside was similar to the rest of the city, but there was no newbie adventurers to be seen. Everyone looked powerful. Okay, let's start asking around about Paul and Geese. Sounds good. I'm sure we'll find something if we ask. Geese should already have an information network here, so I'm sure he'll hear of it if we go around poking using his name. Oh, it looks like that won't be necessary. Following her gaze, a monkey-faced man was deep in conversation with a sword-wielding beastman. I just realized I don't have a voice for Geese, so I'm gonna have to make one.
Come on, I'm asking you. You are one too, I know it.
You're asking the impossible.
Can't you just bend this once? This is a race against time.
It's already been a month, hasn't it? She's dead.
No, there's no way. Even if she is, we gotta at least go in and check. Find her remains. Come on, I'm begging you. I've seen your skills myself. That's why I'm here. I'll even pay you double if that's what you want.
Geese looked desperate. Reese didn't know the weasel could pull off a face like that.
Sorry, try someone else. I'm not eager to die.
You damn coward. Can't believe you'd bother to call yourself an adventurer with that attitude.
Yeah. Say whatever you want.
The man turned and walked out without even looking back. Rudius never seen Geese curse a man, though he didn't know much about him. The Geese Rudius knew was light-hearted. Yeah, this is like that immediate perspective of something else. Because yes, again, back when he was in the Doldia village, it was like this random chance encounter between the two of them. And Geese, I think at that time, sort of picked up that it might be Rudius, but he just kind of played into it. Kind of jumped into Rudius's goofy nature at that time, I think. And by the way, I knew the moment he said that she's been in there for a month, that told me that it wasn't Zenith. Because Zenith has been there for years. So the only female I can think that was with them that could be stuck in there for a whole month was probably Roxy. Now, it could be Shira, it could be Viera, it could be Lilia, but no. I had a feeling it was going to be Roxy, and this is where I was already starting to get really angry at this volume. I'm like, you all suck, because volume 12 sucks, because Roxy's in danger. And yeah, to that note, the only one of Lilia and Shira and Viera that I could see surviving in a dungeon for a month, to even have this inkling that she survived, is Roxy. Again, I don't see the other three surviving in a dungeon for an entire month. He looks like he's really backed in the corner. Oh my, that's how he usually is though. Really? I kind of had a different impression of him. He must have been trying to look more mature in front of you. Hey, Geese.
Oh hey, if it isn't Ellen Elise.
Sorry to keep you waiting.
Not at all. You're actually here way faster than I thought.
Actually, how the hell did you get here so fast? I clicked on like, wait, no, what? Actually, why are you here so damn fast?
It's only been 6 months since I'd sent the letter. Oh, you must not have read it, eh? Probably missed you when you were on your travels.
We'll talk about it later. What's going on with Zenith?
Not great. I sent a letter to you because I figured it would be a drawn-out affair. Though, to be honest, well, we could talk about that later too.
It apparently wasn't going well, but they anticipated as much. His hope that things got resolved before they got there was proven false. There is, yes, it would have been really nice to get there and everybody's like, no, we're good. We just sent the letter and then we figured things out. Which is, yes, technically the hope that Ellen Elise had. They already probably figured it out. He probably just sent the letter as a knee-jerk reaction and then they figured things out. Of course, he was also kind of hoping at first that Paul got there and then everything was secured. For the moment, could you please guide us to where my father is?
Oh hey, that's you, ain't it, boss? You sure got bigger.
And you sure didn't seem to change much, Mr. Geese.
Yuck, enough. That gives me the creeps. Just call me newbie like you used to.
Just wants to be called newbie. There's the newbie. I forgot about the newbie thing. This brought back memories to Rudius. My, you two are close.
Well, we did share a cell together, eh, boss?
Indeed. It sure brings back memories.
That's enough of that, though. I'll take you to where Paul is.
As they arrived at the inn, Geese spoke up.
Listen good. Paul's in quite the state right now. So, Ellen Elise, I know you got a lot to say, but just save it this time.
I can't make any promises. Rudius figured that Ellen Elise wasn't going to suddenly turn hostile or aggressive. This sort of goes in the same thing with Geese, that Rudius has this different perspective of Geese because he met him when he was alone. And this party acts different around each other, obviously. It's the personas that you give in different meetings. You can meet somebody and get a different impression of them, and then you meet somebody else that knows that same person, and they're like, that doesn't sound like them. It's just really the state of mind they were in the moment you met them. And I think that's the same thing with Ellen Elise. He's seen a completely different side of Ellen Elise, and plus, Ellen Elise has changed a lot from the moment they met them. And additionally, Rudius has seen Ellen Elise go through a lot. A very significant stuff, especially around Cliff and everything. Her being reunited with Sylphie. That whole revelation there. Things have changed within Ellen Elise. Whereas before, she would go around, deal with this curse, birth children, raise them and leave them behind. Now she's got a granddaughter, and she's much more focused on Sylphie and that new coming child. Something significantly different than the experiences that Paul and his party has had with Ellen Elise. So Rudius is seeing this different side of her that they might not know yet.
You too, boss. Don't start a fight like you did last time, got it? I'm sure you have a lot you want to say, but just try not to blame him too much, okay?
Yes, it had gone pretty bad last time. It had to be pretty bad if he was going through this long preamble. Though he had seen Paul when he was at his weakest and running from his problems. Rudius just had to be mentally prepared for something similar. Despite his appearances, Paul wasn't mentally the most durable. If something happened, he would sink into a depression immediately. He wasn't an emotional wreck, but he didn't have the resilience to handle massive setbacks. He should bounce back once they found Zenith, but who knew? Now, this is one of those things I'm like, I can't say that what Paul's going through is your standard setbacks. Like, what Paul is going through is tragic. Come on, Rudius, give him some credit. The crap that Paul's going through is so bad, and it's not something that anybody really faces. Losing his entire family, losing his home, losing his village, losing everything. And add on to that all the tragedy that he's seen of people, enslaved and everything and dead from the displacement incident, and wondering when he's going to find the body of a family member. It's terrible. Okay, let's go in, Geese said as they entered. Rudius recognized Paul at a glance. His upper half was flopped over a table. I was so happy. After the whole, what was it? I don't remember if it was last volume or also volume 10 as well, but I've been you're flagging Paul, you're flagging Paul, you're flagging Paul, you're flagging Paul. So the moment that, yes, technically he was saying we're going to go see Paul, I was like, okay, he's not dead. Okay, Paul's still alive. Lilia called out in shock, standing beside Paul. She still wore her maid uniform. Her normally tidy hair was frayed. Her face was haggard with exhaustion. Still, she brightened when their eyes met. She bowed towards Rudius and nudged Paul. The woman sitting in front of Paul stood up, looking at Rudius, stepped back, and lowered her head. It had to be Shira. Paul's accountant? She's still an accountant. Her face was also heavy with exhaustion. Though, he realized this point, everyone's face was. These people were tired. Rudius then went and sat in front of Paul. Lilia announced, "Master, Lord Rudius has come." Paul lifted his head slowly, dark circles beneath his eyes. His entire body had gone gaunt and emaciated. He looked terrible. There was no scruffy stubble around his jaw, and his hair was fairly well kept. He was no longer steeped in a stench of alcohol either. Still, he was at his wit's end. Yeah, this is kind of a nice little note here that, yes, we have a similar situation as what happened before. When Maurice found him in Millis, he was a wreck. But he was drunk the whole time. He was trying to hide from it. He was trying to get away from it, drowning his sorrows inside of a cup. Now it's different. He's just exhausted. It's a different case here. Same despair, but he's handling it differently now. Rudius was glad he came. Seeing his condition, Rudius knew he made the right decision. He knew at this point, this is right. This is right that I came here, despite the fact that he had so much reservations of doing it. I can't leave Sylphie. I can't leave people. I might get there and everything's solved. We might even pass each other on the way. No. Seeing his father, he's like, this was the right choice. He has no regrets at this point that this decision was good for Paul.
Rudy?
Father, it's been a while. Paul stared dazed and unfocused. It was obvious that he hadn't been sleeping. Last time they met, they fought. But not today. Today, he was the Buddha Rudius. I like this. Again, this is kind of a little very subtle thing, but the idea of this is not going to be like last time. And he even gets in that later on when he starts explaining things. He's like, I'm being very careful about what I say because I don't want that same impression to be on him and us fight again. He's trying to do correctly this time. He's trying to make sure that he keeps in his head that my father in front of me is a wreck. Be careful. Don't hurt him.
Huh? What? That's weird. I can see Rudy. What's up, Rudy? It's been a long time. You sure look like you're doing well. How are Nor and Aisha?
His reaction wasn't expected. Rudius figured that he'd be sporting a flask and yelling at him. I took them in. They're living in the magic city of Soraya right now. They're doing fine. I've let them in the care of some trustworthy people, just in case.
Oh, okay. That figures. Just as reliable as ever, Rudy. How are you, by the way? Doing good?
Yes, I guess I am. Paul smiled, flippant and carefree. A smile unbefitting of the circumstances, as if he had lost all heart.
Again, that extremely broken state. Oh, okay. Well, that's good. That's the most important thing.
There was no life left in his eyes, like he had become an empty husk. Seriously, this was what Paul had become?
Rudy.
Paul stood and gave him a tight hug.
I'm hopeless, bastard.
Oh, this is just like the letter. It's just like the letter. I'm a hopeless bastard. Rudius silently returned his embrace. I am glad that they actually hugged before. I'm glad this time they actually hugged immediately. Rudius silently returned the embrace. Rudius was afraid at this point that Paul wasn't going to return to how he was. But everything was fine now. Rudius was going to fix this. It was the whole reason he came there.
I can't save you. I can't even keep a promise I made. I've completely failed you as a father. I really am hopeless bastard.
Please, don't worry. I'm here now. Things are going to be okay.
Rudy, you've really gotten big, haven't you?
His squeeze kind of hurt, but Rudius wasn't going to complain. I did indeed. I'm going to have a child soon, too. So just leave the rest to me. and take some time to relax.
Huh? A child? What? Wait, you're actually the real thing?
I am indeed.
So, this isn't a dream?
I'm dreaming enough to seem like I'm one, right? I like the fun jabs.
Yeah, it's definitely you.
It's definitely Rudius. Paul looked around. Lilia bid him good morning and informed him that he has been out since Talhan left. Rudius at this point was relieved that his father was just half asleep. He felt that he was too young to be stuck looking after his old man. This hurts. This really hurts. I guess this is from a perspective of somebody that's had to take care of a family member in their final days. It's like one of those aspects of like, yes, it's hard, but at the same time, never a burden. And so it kind of hurts a little bit to hear somebody say something like that. Now, it's not that he gets into detail of like, gosh, I would have to wipe his butt and I'd have to look after him all the time. It wasn't like that, but just like a casual jab that I'm like, ugh, that hurts. After Paul retook his seat, he asked why Rudius was there. I already told you, I came to help.
No, that's not what I mean.
Rudius shook his head. They had a similar communication mix-up before it turned into a fight. Things would be okay this time, though. Everything is fine. Norn and Aisha as well. They're being looked after.
Oh, okay.
Paul looked confused, reaching out to pat Rudius' body again to make sure that he was actually there.
No, but, I mean, didn't you get here way too fast?
We took a somewhat unique method of transportation. I'm sure I'll have to explain it when it's time to go home.
Unique, huh? Well, knowing you, I guess it's possible.
It's like nothing shocks them anymore. It's like, yeah, I guess that's Rudius. Well, just to clear everything up, why don't you tell me what happened after Geese sent that letter?
Oh, no, hold up. I'm kind of confused.
All right then, why don't you drink some water and try to calm down? At this point, he made some water for him and Paul gulped it down. Paul knew Geese had gone off and sent the letter. He just didn't know why they had arrived so fast. After Paul paused, clearly racking his brain, he asked about the kid that Rudius mentioned. Rudius got Paul up to date. Being married, not with Edis, with Sylphie. Paul hadn't heard of Sylphie surviving the displacement at this point, so it was a little bit of a shock to him. Rudius then told Paul everything about enrolling and his marriage. But, again like I mentioned earlier, choosing his words very carefully. Rudius had nothing but good memories at school. Even if it had its low points, it wouldn't be exaggerating to say that he had a time of his life there. Made friends, found his wife, had plenty of fun. He tried to keep recounting the events as objective as possible, but he couldn't hide it. There was no denying he had a good time there. I think this is important to note here. Again, he's trying not to have the same thing happen as last time, so he's being very careful not to sound like he's excited and happy. He doesn't want Paul to be upset. But, note here, he couldn't hide it. Thus meaning that Paul on the reverse doesn't lash out.
I see. So, a child. My grandchild.
Rudius was prepared for him to scold him. Having a child meant that he was doing the deed, while Paul was working desperately to save Zenith. There's two aspects here that Rudius has not taken into account. One, that Paul has changed after their fight. He doesn't want to do that again. He regrets it. And two, he's been constantly telling Rudius to enjoy his life. I'll take care of it. It's his own doing. Enjoyment was supposed to be shared, and Paul was living a life of abstinence. Paul's head dropped.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're about to become a father, and yet you've come here because I'm so worthless.
Rudius was a bit shocked at his apologies. No, actually, I'm the one who feels bad. We haven't even found Mother yet, and I'm just moving on with my life.
No, I can't blame you for that. After all, I slept with Lilia once too. I mean, I meant to wait until we found Zenith. I really am pathetic.
Paul lowered his eyes, looking as if he was going to cry again. He was so fragile. Because yes, technically that's important to him. It makes sense. He messed up once, and he doesn't want to mess up again with his relationship with Zenith and having Lilia involved. Lilia spoke up. We were attacked by a succubus. We had no choice.
Even so,
Paul cradled his face in his hands. Being a succubus, Rudius knew he wasn't at fault. But Paul did have someone in the party who could use detoxification. Rudius turned to Shiera, and she panicked. I was like, at this point right here, like, I didn't know that she was a healer. I don't remember if they ever had her using healing spells way back here. Or any indication that she had detoxification. I'm terribly sorry. I was so terrified of the captain, I couldn't do anything.
Rudy, please don't blame her. I'm the one at fault.
And here's another missed opportunity by the anime. They've never, in the anime adaptation, ever gotten into Shiera and Viera. And so I have a feeling that this scene's going to be very glossed over. Because then it's not going to make any sense. Well, why is she panicking? Yes, you could probably just say it's because Paul would be out of his mind and everything, but it gets into more detail with the novel because there's the emphasis there that she had gone through something really terrible and she has this phobia of men. After the succubus attacked them, Paul must have went right after the women. It was probably frightening. Being the main damage dealer, having to hold him down to make contact with the spell would be difficult. Lilia must have stepped forward to resolve the situation. Again, that means the idea that Shiera, who has this phobia of men, would have to go up there and touch him as he's huffing and puffing and wanting to rip clothes off. Yeah, because of her trauma, she wouldn't be able to do it, making it something that Lilia herself could easily resolve, because it's technically a life and death situation. Again, as we mentioned in the previous chapters, this idea that not only do the men crave to have these urges, but additionally, they will attack other men. So Talhand, who was there, if he got anywhere close to Paul, Paul would have attacked him. Yeah, I ran into a succubus on the way here. I get how terrifying they are. There wasn't anything you could have done against it.
But Talhan was completely unaffected. I was the only one who couldn't resist.
Rudius was shocked, not really knowing how that worked. Perhaps it didn't work on dwarves? Yeah, massive question mark there. I think they sort of indicate something later on about Talhand, which I might get into later on. But yeah, it sort of indicates this idea that either dwarves are ineffective or Talhand has a preference. But again, it's like, does a preference really affect it that much? Rudius noticed Paul's gaze fixed on him. What is it?
Nothing. I just... You sound more confident and assertive than you used to.
Rudius didn't notice it until he pointed out. Yes, Rudius didn't know when he started speaking so freely in front of people. He planned on keeping his usual casual speech separate from his usual habits of address. He must have gotten used to it while talking to Zenoba and the others. Yes, obviously, he started getting a little more casual with everybody else, and then at some point he got a habit of it. He's no longer going around and talking all formal with everybody, which honestly creeps everybody out. Even though he sort of did it with Geese a minute ago and creeped Geese out. Oh, yes, my apologies. I'll be more prudent in the future.
Nah, it's okay. You sound more like a man when you talk like that anyways.
Paul laughed, but then tears started falling down his face.
Rudy, you really have grown up so much.
Hearing that, Rudius was brought to tears as well. So good. Every time these two get reunited, it's like, what the hell, dude? It's a father thing for me. Having lost my father, anything with fathers hits. I was, of course, back in, was it Volume 5, crying all the damn time. They were family, yet didn't know how much each other had changed.
I'm sorry for being such a terrible father.
Rudius wrapped his arms around Paul. Rudius didn't even have to stretch this time. They had become the same height without realizing it. After a little time crying together, they switched gears. Eloise planted herself nearby in a chair with a humph. Paul's eyes narrowed while Eloise's brow knitted. This was bad. Father, Miss Eloise came all the way from the magic city of Soraya to help out, knowing our family was in trouble. She came here even though she didn't want to see you. Paul took to his feet, walked to Eloise. Eloise stood with her hand balled into a fist. She was worried about us as well. I know there must have been a lot that happened in the past, but out of consideration for me, could you please let it be water under the bridge now? Eloise glared down at Paul, a head taller than him. This girl tall. We never really got an indication of how tall she is until this moment. Rudius thought they'd punch each other or possibly kill each other. Was their relationship that bad? Rudius looked to Geese for help. The jerk gave a helpless shrug and an infuriating grin. He was really worthless.
Eloise?
Yes, what is it? Paul looked back at Rudius, then to Lilia, and then Shiera. There seemed to be some meaning behind the gaze. He dropped to his knees, forehead against the ground. He was groveling.
I'm sorry for what happened back then.
Eloise looked away, flaring her lips in a pout. This says so much. This right here, just like, okay, all right, we've answered that question. we've answered all that question. Well, I was partially at fault back then too. Rudius expected her to throw curses at him.
I've caused you a lot of problems since the displacement incident happened. I am really sorry about that.
It's fine. I had someone I wanted to look for too, so it was convenient. Is she talking about Sylphie? I'm thinking it was probably Laws and Sylphie. I don't know that she would have known about Sylphie at that time, But I mean, she could have got the hint of it if she ever looked at the logs. But here's the problem. We don't know that she went to the refugee camp. In the anime, she shows up at the refugee camp with Talhand behind Roxy. But Roxy doesn't meet them until later. So Ellen Lace may have gone by the refugee camp, seen that Laws had a child because they're always listed after each other. And she could have seen that Sylphie was there if she didn't know that Sylphie existed already. But it could have been the fact that she was looking for Laws. But on that note, she could have seen that Laws had a child at that point and went to go find Sylphie because knowing that Laws was dead. But still, she could have been looking for Sylphie specifically. But there could be somebody else in the area that she was looking for. I doubt it. Or she could just making up stuff right now.
Thank you.
You're very welcome, Paul. That was the end of it. Just like that. They both had a hint of a smile on their face. It's like the problem between them just disappeared. Despite Eloise saying she couldn't forgive him. Which this right here confirms, I guess destroys one theory I have, but at the same time pretty much confirms the other theory, is that yes, Eloise liked Paul. I'm having a feeling now that Ellen Lace and Paul were in a relationship. And I think it's more in the idea that Ellen Lace wanted to be Paul's partner. And then Paul just ran off with some other girl and just immediately married her the moment they laid down together. Of course she'd be mad. But again, there might be more to it still. There might be more. It might be both. Why not both? It could also be my theory in the idea of him forcing himself upon Zenith. And Ellen Lace hating that. Again, because everybody had this disdain for Paul. But their reasons for not liking him can be different. Like later on, we'll even have Telhan mention the idea that Rudius is much more reliable than his terrible father. Paul stood, dusted off his knees, and looked up to Ellen Lace, who gently returned his gaze. Again, she liked him. Age hasn't been kind. It has to you. You're as beautiful as ever. Oh my, I'll tell Zenith you said that. That means I'll get to see her being jealous again. Dude. Ugh. Right in the gut. That's the sad thing. It's like that aspect of being separated from somebody and just seeing some sort of face of them is enough. Something to look forward to, I'm sure. Paul was surprised that she endured the long journey here, not skipping a beat about her curse. But of course, he questioned if she slept with Rudius. Certainly not. I made this far thanks to Cliff's magical implement. Cliff? Who's that? My husband. Your what? Paul grew loud and wide-eyed. So you have a husband? The man has some strange taste then. What kind of joke is this? Are you sure this man really agreed to marry you? Hey Rudy, do you know about this guy? This Cliff? Paul laughed as he looked to Rudius. But Rudius nodded with a straight face. Mainly because Ellen Lace looked like she was ready to kill. He's just so casually being like jokey about like, some guy likes you. Rudius, do you know about this? And like right behind him, he had this face of death. Father, you've gone a bit too far. Yes, I do think Cliff has some odd taste, but he's a very respectable man. Cliff had his problems reading the room, but he was honest and unashamed about his love. He was an amazing individual to Rudius. Seriously? Well, he must be pretty incredible if you say that. Okay, that was my bad then. Be sure to introduce me when we get back. Yes, you should be sorry. He's far more of an amazing man than you. Ellen Lace puts Cliff above Paul on the totem pole. Oof. Paul is a dirtbag, so he deserves to be under there. All that aside, Rudius, Ellen Lace, thank you for coming. We're just getting started. Of course I came. We're family. Father, please explain what's going on. Paul explained that Roxy and Talhan met him in Milshin. They crossed the sea to Begret Continent, then to Rappan. They were reunited with Geese and figured out where Zenith was located. That was a shock. That was a bit of a shock because I thought at this point they'd be like just going in different labyrinths trying to find some sign. How do you know which labyrinth? This place is filled with labyrinths. Which one? How do you know which one? According to Geese's information, your mother's about a day north of here. Captured in a labyrinth. Reese thought someone captured her, or did the labyrinth hold people captive for 6 whole years? I don't know. And she's still alive? I don't know. There was a party that went in there a few years ago, and apparently one of the members said they saw someone resembling Zenith. Also, we haven't heard from them since they went in again. That wasn't reassuring. Was it wishful thinking that she was still trapped in there? Then again, according to what Roxy had said, Zenith had still been alive when Kishirika seen her. Now this is where I like this part right here because it gives us a timetable. Because everything is so uncertain about, like, well, when was the last time she was seen? How do we know if she's even alive? It's been so long. How can somebody be alive? What can you possibly say that will give some sort of hope that she's even alive? Are we just trying to find her body at this point? Based on Geese's information, the party that seen Zenith stopped coming before Roxy conferred with Kishirika. That was 2 years ago. Geese's information had been acquired 4 years ago. In other words, Zenith had gone 2 years without contact and was still alive when Kishirika seen her. So if she was able to live for 2 years wherever she's at, the assumption is that she could survive longer than that. That meant that there was a high likelihood that she was still alive even now. Now the question mark is, and it's the question mark that I've always had, is it a case that wherever she's at, she's suspended? Like, it's almost like she's in a cryo sleep. And so she's not aging, she's not decaying, she's not growing hungry, she's not starving or anything, she's just frozen. Or is it a case that she's stuck down somewhere and she's surviving by killing and consuming monsters? Now that would be a little difficult because she's a healer, but she could be more resourceful than I give her credit for. She could be a decent fighter when she needs to be. And maybe it might be just be pure desperation of attack and then heal yourself, consume food, attack, heal yourself, consume food. Or there might be something in the area she's at that she's able to feed off of, maybe bugs or something. But I've been sort of more leaning towards the idea of suspended. Like she's suspended in animation. She's not able to move, she's frozen in place. Time has stopped still for her somehow. But I like that this has finally given us a timetable. We at least know that she went for 2 years, and then Kishirika seen her. They had been betting on that sliver of hope as they searched for her. Even if she wasn't alive, it was important to confirm her death. Of course, Rudius hoped she was still alive. When he heard that she could be dead, his heart sunk. Maybe he had already figured it was too late. It had been 6 years. Again, we're still hitting on the idea that Rudius right here is confirming in his own heart he does care for his mother, which is sometimes hard to really connect sometimes with him. His relationship with his family in this new world has always been an element of feeling like it's disconnected, but every now and then being reminded it's a thing with him, and him realizing, oh wait, this is my sister, this is my father, this is my mother. It's kind of like what I said before, where the displacement incident affected everybody differently. Like with Norn, she lost everything and any semblance of stability and had to focus on her father. Paul lost his entire family and was crushed. Rudius was discovering what he lost. Family. Geese spoke up.
All we have is some secondhand information,
So we don't know. Maybe she's dead. Maybe she's being possessed by some sort of monster.
all we got is that she has been seen in a labyrinth. Paul followed up. This labyrinth is a very old and difficult one. In this past year, we've been diving into it numerous times, but it's been rough. We have 4 labyrinth diving pros in our party, but we didn't even get halfway in. Pretty sad, really. There was 4 members, Paul, Geese, Talhand, and Roxy. They had others, but they weren't pros. But then again, where were the 3 others? Again, this is where it starts hitting. It starts reminding me. It's coming up. Suddenly, someone entered the room.
Oh, looks like I missed a touching reunion, eh?
Rias assumed by his appearance that this had to be Talhan. A bikini-armored woman came in behind him. He remembered it being Viera. Viera gave a bow before going to Sierra's side. Talhan approached Rudius and looked him over.
You Paul's boy?
Yes. Pleasure to meet you. I'm Rudius.
Talhan, you look as intelligent as I heard.
Rudius, you better stay away from him. He steals what men hold dear. There it is right there. There it is right there. I'm thinking they're implying here that Talhan swings the other way. Which again, if it's not an aspect of him being a dwarf that the succubus can't affect him, it might be the fact of his preference itself. Which honestly is an interesting thing to add to the whole chemistry of how the succubus themselves work. Does it play on your desires? I don't necessarily believe that it's going to be playing on your desires. I think it's going to be strictly men who like women. If there's that preference there, it affects you. There's a good chance that Talhan, we might find out later, maybe Talhan found the smell to be putrid, just like females do, because these females are attracted to males, like Ellen Elise. We just thought, what, men hold dear? Pride? Yes, it could be pride in the idea of Talhan out drinking everybody, but again, I don't think that's what Ellen Elise would go out of her way to imply.
Ah, I thought it smelled a bit too much like women in here.
Again, there's another indication.
What is this, eh? You tagged along too?
Oh my, are you saying I shouldn't have?
Of course I am. Just you being here stirs up trouble.
Talhan poured a drink and gulped it down. A strong smell of alcohol filled the air.
Have a go.
Talhan handed Ellen Elise a drink, and she chugged it down. Quite the crude alcohol.
Goes perfect with someone as crude as you.
Regis wondered if this was some sort of dwarven greeting. No one was commenting on this. It left Rudius puzzled.
Well, now that everyone's here, let's pick up where we left off, okay?
Paul steered it back to the point. It seemed Talhan's grand entrance threw them off course. Wait, did he say everyone? This is where I got so mad. This is where I got so mad. I'm like, y'all suck. Chapter 12 sucks. Hold on a moment. What about Master Roxy? Paul's face grew dark when he asked. No, everyone had the same face, save for Ellen Elise. But Ellen Elise seemed to quickly understand what this meant. What? It can't be. A single word popped into Rudius's head. The worst imaginable. Death. A month ago, Roxy got caught in one of the traps in the labyrinth. Rudius's heart began to pound. He didn't want to hear this. Not the blue-haired little girl. It couldn't be. He didn't want to hear them say it. Rudius knew that she was a competent adventurer who has gone into labyrinths on her own before. She couldn't use voiceless casting, but she shortened her incantations. She was a king tier water magician. She was Rudius's savior. Even though he didn't want to hear more, he asked. She's not dead, is she? Ellen Elise got up from her seat and placed her hands on Rudius's shoulders. She's taking care of her grandson.
No, but she stepped on a teleportation circle and disappeared. We haven't confirmed her death. It's likely that she's still alive out in the labyrinth.
That was enough. For the moment at least, Rudius felt the tension leave him, though his face soon stiffened, again, at Geese's protests.
Come on, Paul. It's just not possible. I get it that it's Roxy that we're talking about. That isn't a kind of place that magicians can survive on their own. Sure, maybe she's still alive, but the chances of that are...
Talhan interrupted him.
No, Roxy's not your average magician. There's a good chance that she's still kicking.
You say that, but we have been looking all month and haven't found her.
We got in 5 times and nothing.
Geese, how long are you going to keep this up? They began arguing amongst themselves. Rudius remembered Geese being easygoing, but yet was not pissed off. Rudius felt he was at his wit's end. Again, let's remember, Geese is protesting here. So it kind of looks bad. It looks like Geese is the outlier, the one that's doom and gloom. But Geese has been the one that's been trying to recruit people to go back in there and find her. So there is an element of a little bit of conflict here. Maybe he himself wanting to acknowledge it, but at the same time not. But there also could be an aspect that he's in conflict with the rest of the group, and so he's still going along with it. Rudius realized that Roxy did tend to be careless sometimes. So Rudius could see her stepping on a teleportation trap. Still, if she wasn't confirmed dead, he wanted to believe that she was alive. It didn't seem possible for someone like her to die so easily. At least, he wanted to believe she couldn't. So, he would hold on to that. He groaned and thought. He was more shocked by this news than when he heard Zenith might be dead. Again, there is that struggle there with the idea of family versus somebody else, but again, Roxy is unfortunately for him more important in his life. She has done so much more for him than Zenith did. So it makes sense that he'd be more crushed by this than Zenith. He didn't have time to really connect to Zenith. He didn't try to connect to Zenith. They connected, don't get me wrong, but not as much. Rudius interrupted them and asked them to get back on subject. He wanted to know what kind of labyrinth this is. They looked at each other, then Paul spoke up. I laughed so loud when I read this.
A teleportation labyrinth.
Hearing that, Rudius could almost hear the book rustling in his bags, as if the book heard someone call its name. The one titled An Exploratory Account of the Teleportation Labyrinths. And everything suddenly connects. And it gets in this later too. I think Rudius was supposed to go to Shreya to go to the labyrinths. Oh, I say that's so stupid, Refugee. It's so stupid. Oh, gosh. How convenient. Or is it convenient? Yes, kind of hits on my theories that I really do think at this point that the man god did want Rudius to come here. He just had to go to Shreya first, because damn if this book isn't right on the spot and on the nose. I think he needed this thing. Like, Rudius just came in there with the golden ticket and telling everybody, I got what we needed. Here it is, which we get into with chapter 2, but god dang, such a good chapter. And I hate it so much too, because the moment I read about Roxy, I'm like, no, damn it, no. Damn it, Refugia, no. My girl. I finally get to see Roxy and I don't. Like, I was so excited the moment they hit Ripon. I'm like, yes, Roxy. I get to see Roxy. I get to see Roxy. And then the moment I seen Geese said, I'm like, no, I'm not going to see Roxy. Son of a... Yeah. Well, let's get into it. Chapter 2. I'm already seeing at this point, I'm probably not going to make it through 3, but at least we're going to get to 2 chapters. Chapter 2, confirming the situation. Roxy was in trouble. Rudius felt the urge to immediately run off and find her. The moment I read this, I'm like, yes, like you did, Sarah. What happened with Sarah? It was like, oh, so she's still there? All right, peace out. And he left. He like immediately went to the inn, got his stuff, and went. But here's different. Here we're sort of getting a change in how Rudius responds to things. He's not knee-jerk anymore. Again, think about it. Back with Sarah, Rudius was still in the mindset that he was going to die. He was still in the mindset he's looking for death. Volume 7 was Rudius looking for death. Zenith was an excuse to keep moving forward, but he was looking for death. He's different now. He has so much to live for, and he's matured so much that he understands that this is a situation you can't just rush into. He's never gone to a labyrinth before. He's gone to Forest before. Never to a labyrinth. Roxy was lost in a teleportation labyrinth, and he had the book at his side. He had spent time researching teleportation circles himself. Using this book, he could guide them. But first, he had to be clear on where things currently stood. It was important. It was a race against time for both Roxy and Zenith. Even 5 minutes late could be the difference between life and death. That is a tragic thing. Could you imagine going down there and you get to that one moment, you turn that one corner, and they just breathe their last breath. Oof. But for that reason, they couldn't be hasty. They had to prepare and save them without fail. Overlooking something important would render their efforts in vain. It could cost them days of time. There was no room for mistakes, or it would leave Rudius with overwhelming regrets. Rudius told Paul about the book of the Teleportation Labyrinth. It was a book on circles, which was taboo. But luckily, it went unnoticed. This is something I think I've thought about, but I don't think I ever talked about it in Mushoku Mondays. Why is this book there? This is taboo. It shouldn't exist. Reese is wondering, was it just overlooked? Or perhaps, because it's an adventurous tale, it was labeled as pure fiction. Or maybe it was fact that, yes, the author itself used the concept of the Teleportation Labyrinth to spin a fictional tale. But that seemed unlikely to Rudius, because he has seen the real deal. He knows what's in there looks legit. And again, because it was overlooked, because it's truth and not fiction, means that the man god knew it was there. This is the only place where he can find one. Let me send him there. Rudius had researched circles himself, and it had the most accurate and precise information he found when cross-referencing other books. Still, he couldn't rule out the fact that it was referencing a different teleportation labyrinth. Good point. That's a thought that I probably would not have even figured. Rudius had Paul look it over to confirm that it matched the labyrinth that they would be entering. Paul looked at the cover for a long pause, and then handed it over to Geese. I thought right here it was like one of those moments of like, did he look at it and go, I can't read. No, it's just that Geese was doing all that stuff, so it makes sense. Rudius didn't know why he did this, but everyone acted natural. So he chose not to ask. It must be Geese's role in Paul's party. He was sort of a jack of all trades. He may have been in charge of mapping the labyrinth, which yes, we end up finding out is the case. With Geese assigned to read the book,
Rudius decided to question Paul on the labyrinth. So here's where we get a big info dump, and like I said before, I love this stuff. It breathes life into it, and I love these little intricate details of what they're going to be facing up against. For monsters on the first 3 floors, because we find out later that Paul has only made it down 3 floors, there was 5 types of monsters. B rank Death Road Tarantula, an enormous venomous spider that shot out thread, poison treated by beginner tier detoxification. Then there was a B rank Iron Crawler, tank-like caterpillar, heavy and tough. Then the A rank Mud Skull, a human-shaped monster covered in mud, a skull buried in the center that was its weak point. It used magic to sling mud at you. Then we had the A rank Armored Warrior, a rusty suit of armor with 4 arms wielding razor-sharp blades. And then finally, an A rank Devouring Devil, a beast with long arms and legs, knife-like claws and fangs. That one I need a picture of. I think I got every one of them figured out, but that one might need a picture of. Paul had only made it to the 3rd floor. Rumors were that it had 6 to 7 floors. No one had delved far enough to find its guardian yet. Again, note, even the guy that wrote the book thought that they were going to be able to get down there really easily, but then he messed up, and he never went down again. While the state of the floors was hard to describe, the book had some accounts. Again, this is where he's already realizing there's a match here. Things that they're saying is matching with what the book says. It matched the spiders, caterpillars, mud skulls, but on the 4th floor, only mud skulls and armored warriors. 5th floor was armored warriors and devouring devils. After the 6th floor, only devouring devils. Nothing in the book for floors beyond the 6th. Again, that matches because they said there was 6 to 7. It was 6. Then again, the book itself never went beyond that. The first 3 floors were part of an ant nest. Complex, winding to rooms at the end. Teleportation circles located at the back of these rooms. After the 3rd floor, it turned into a stone ruin. Everything Paul stated was falling in line with the book he read and what he had seen for himself. This is amazing! Ha! Leave it to you, boss! You brought us something incredible! Geese snapped the book closed and raised his voice in excitement. Geese claimed that if this book was correct, they had a map down to the 6th floor. He handed the book over to Talhan before explaining that the book would tell them which circles to step on and which to avoid. Additionally, where each of them led and what they would face when used. Despite this excitement, Paul's face turned grim as he fixed Geese with a glare. I see. Then, can you tell what happened to Roxy and Zenith based on the information written in that book? Well, no. Don't get too carried away. You can't make any more mistakes. It was true. They couldn't go blindly believing in that book, only for it to lead them to their doom. That's another technically interesting aspect of this. What's to say the book wasn't written in a way that at some point in it, you will meet doom? What if it's written in a way that everything matches up, and then if you keep believing in it, at the end, you will meet the same fate he did? It's kind of interesting. Basically giving whoever reads it the keys to complete the dungeon, but the end meet the same fate he did. But it also could be an aspect that the author believed that this would lead you to here, and then he was wrong. I get what you're trying to say, Paul, but with this book and a dependable vanguard and a rear guard, we'll be fine. Let's rejoice a little bit for the moment, yeah? Paul looked around to everyone before looking to Rudius. Yeah. You're right. Sorry about that. With that, Paul wanted to decide on the formation. His voice seemed more energetic, as if he'd gathered his spirits. Even though he wanted to give off this feeling that he was in control of the situation, that he was being level-headed about the situation, being cautious, he's actually happy. This news, this book, Rudius being there, Ellen Elise being there, has re-sparked his hopes. They'd be diving with 5 members. Paul, Ellen Elise, Geese, Talhand, and Rudius. Viera and Shiera would be swapped out by Rudius and Ellen Elise. With how narrow the labyrinth was, any more than that would just get in each other's way. Ellen Elise would be the tank, Paul would be the secondary attacker, Rudius would be healing and offense, Talhand off-tank and secondary attacker. Rudius felt that Talhand's role was a bit vague. He was a magician capable of intermediate tier earth magic, as well as an all-purpose fighter, so he's in a position to do either. We'll be looking after one another. Talhand said that while patting him on the shoulders. Talhand would be either in front of him or behind him. For some reason, when Talhand patted his shoulders, a chill ran down his spine. And they're gonna keep hinting at this. Rudius would be in charge of all magic, but also healing after battle. He had his work cut out for him for his first dive. But with his work as an adventurer, he felt like he should be able to handle it. Geese would be in charge of different tasks, checking map, directing, foods, supplies, selecting and extracting drops. as well as deciding when to fall back. He was both in command and an errand boy, sort of like a manager. Vera, Shira, and Lilia would act as a sort of house sitter. This is kind of an interesting thing that we're noting here, which apparently was an important job as well. He notes the fact that many clans assign people to be on house sitting while they dive the dungeon. Some cases, when it was way far away from town, they would set up a camp and they would stay out there. But it's like, what's the importance of that job? To look after their gear, or to, I guess, notify people if they don't come back out? Which I guess you would know based on them not coming back out. Rudius at this point left the preparations to the pros, Talhan and Annalise. He understood he was an amateur. He could use his knowledge of his previous life to think of strategies, but he left that aside for now. If anything popped to mind, he would suggest it. Purely a suggestion, but he had no idea if his roguelike RPG knowledge would apply here. I like this. He acknowledges the fact that I am the amateur. He's not getting ahead of himself. He's not acting like all I gotta do is go down there and blast everything. I just went in and blasting. You know? Hey, Rudius. I miss Bodyguard right now. He is acknowledging, I keep my mouth shut. Don't just keep butting in. Let them plan things out for me. And I'll provide whenever I can. And he starts to do that in chapter 3. Paul announced their first objective: to get to the 3rd floor and find Roxy. If she was in bad condition, they would immediately withdraw. If she was in good condition, however, they could continue onward. The 6 of them could explore the deepest depths to search for Zenith. With no ideas on how long it would take, it was going to be a long, complicated search. That night, Rudius stayed in the same room as Paul and Lilia. Geese arranged it, saying that family should have some time alone together. Honestly, Rudius still seen Lilia as a maid, not family. That was all she ever was until Aisha was born. And even after that, it was all he could ever see her as. This kind of hurts because honestly, if you guys remember way back in Volume 1, the moment that Rudius saved Lilia, she started acting differently around him. She appreciated that Rudius saved her life and saved Aisha's life. That's why she's always dedicated Aisha to eventually serve Rudius. But yes, you can make the argument that even then, Lilia herself was still acting as a maid. She wasn't acting as a mother-in-law or anything like that. But it still kind of hurts. It's like the same mentality as Norn. The maid joke. Oh, and the maid. It kind of hurts. Especially with like, yes, technically a lot of my thought process here is based on how differently the anime adapted that whole scene with him and Lilia. That hug. That hug that she grabs Rudius and hugs him from behind. It's just like, you can see that Lilia cares for him so much, but he still kind of just sees her as a maid. It's just like, oof, ow. But again, technically, for years and years and years, she was a maid, very professional maid, and gave that persona of a very good maid. Now, here's a part where I'm just kind of, what? Paul regarded her as his wife, but ultimately only as his second wife. Zenith still came first on Paul's list of priorities, with Lilia coming in second, and Norn after that. That meant Aisha was fourth, and Rudius figured that meant that he was last. What? What? Where is this paragraph coming from? I read this and I'm like, wait, did Paul say something like this at some point that insinuated this? Where did he get an indication of priorities here? Was it based on one of the letters? Maybe he possibly stated things in a certain order and it just kind of subconsciously entered in Rudius' head? Now, I will say, my immediate thought here is priority of trying to save. The order in which he thinks that each of these individuals is at highest risk. Because we've sort of created priorities like that before, or at least we had this moment where Roxy, Talhan, and Annalise sort of created this priority list based on who they thought could protect themselves best. Obviously putting like Lilia and Aisha at the highest of the priority list because they couldn't defend themselves as well as, say, Zenith or Rudius. But that doesn't explain why you would have Zenith ahead of Aisha, or why would you place Lilia and Norn in those positions. But I will say that if there's any indication that he feels like Paul didn't give him as much priority, again, it's because he believes that Rudius can take care of himself. But again, I'm struggling on where did he get this list from? Is it a list of who he thinks Paul loves most? On that note, why would Lilia be above Norn? At least. It doesn't make any sense. Zenith makes sense. first priority, his wife. But Lilia being above Norn and Aisha doesn't make sense to me. Yes, he does love Lilia, but more than a daughter from his wife? That doesn't make any sense. Again, I struggle with this whole list. The only thing here that makes sense to me is the idea that he felt that he was last. But I think that's twofold. One, he believes Rudius can take care of himself, but it also could be an aspect that he doesn't feel as connected to Rudius because Rudius acts so differently than normal children. He never had a chance to nurture Rudius. He had a chance to nurture Norn and try to Aisha, even though Lilia stopped him. Again, very puzzling paragraph. The way Lilia conducted herself suggested that she only seen Paul as her employer. This is our first time sharing a sleeping quarters, isn't it, Lord Rudius? Yes, it is. The way that she spoke made him speak a little bit more stiffly. If the master's snoring disturbs you, please feel free to shove him. She joked, keeping things surprisingly lighthearted. But he was unable to offer her the same. He had no idea what to say, forgetting how they even talked in the past. Again, it's happening. Another person he's reunited with, where he's trying to think of how they talked back here and what to talk about, and how to talk with them. His recollection of the Buena village was rather businesslike. Yeah, technically she was a maid, and she was very, very professional. During the entire interaction, Paul watched with an odd expression. Rudius wouldn't call it a cheesy grin, but he looked relaxed. If I might ask a question, Lord Rudius? Yes, what is it? Is Aisha performing acceptably? Thanks to her question, he realized what he could talk about. Family. They were all family. He could talk about that. Just kind of broke it. Duh. Rudius assured Aisha was working really hard, not causing trouble, but a big help. While Lilia was worried that she might have some selfish demands, Rudius told her that he wished that Aisha was a bit more demanding. Smiling and looking relieved, Lilia asked if Aisha and Norn were still fighting. He admitted that things were a bit strained between them, but nothing major happened. I've always told her to show deference for Mistress Norn. I have no idea why her relationship has devolved so. It's not something you can control. Besides, Aisha is still a child. Don't you think the most important thing as a parent is to love them both equally? Damn. Rudius is like telling her how to raise her daughter. But I think the only reason why he gets away with it is both the aspect of her possibly seeing that he's right, but also, again, not arguing with her master. Rudius is technically above her in a hierarchy. Perhaps you're right. Aisha is my child, but she's the master's daughter as well, so blood doesn't have anything to do with it. We're family. Thank you. Rudius dropped some truth bombs. Rudius dropping truth bombs. Paul stared with a deeply emotional expression. What's with that look? You've been grinning the whole time. It's nice to watch. What is? Seeing the little boy I remember all grown up, talking to Lilia like this. Rudius figured it was moving to Paul to see his adult son interacting with his wife. While not his mother, they were family. He doesn't just see her as a maid. Good, he doesn't see her as just a maid. Rudius figured that he'd know the feeling once his child grew up. Paul got a little nostalgic considering how tall Rudius was when they last seen each other, and how he was married now. Paul wanted to give a big celebration when they got home. Indeed. Oh, and don't forget, this will be your first grandchild. You'll be a grandpa. Oh, knock it off. I'm not that old yet. Paul didn't look as displeased as his words suggest. That's right, you're having a kid. Which means you've done it, haven't you? My lord, I'm not sure such crude questions are really appropriate. Ah, come on, I've always wanted to have these kind of talks with him before. Even so. What, aren't you curious too? That's an unfair question to ask. Well, so, who was your first partner? I guess it was Sylphie after all. Or was it Eris? I seem to remember you saying you two split up, but was there really nothing between the two of you? Part of Rudius wondered if it was appropriate to discuss this, but he knew Paul was in high spirits. Being as they would be in the labyrinth the next day, this would be their only chance to cut loose and swap stories. Paul mentioned the fact that when he was younger, he had so much experience, he pushed Rudius to ask any question. So, Rudius jumped in. All right then, there's a few questions I'd like to ask. Honestly, Lord Rudius, I can't believe you're going along with this. She talks like that, but she's pretty aggressive in bed. My lord. Oh yeah, you did mention that she was the one that approached you before. Why don't you explain that in a little more detail? Lord Rudius, would you both please stop? My goodness. She gave up a sigh looking at the two of them. But, still, she had a smile on her face. They continued talking on in the night. By midnight, they turned off the lights and they went to bed. Rudius couldn't sleep, maybe turned on by their discussion. He never dreamed of the day that he could swap sex stories. That aside, he needed to focus on what was currently happening. He was wondering if he was dancing in the palm of the man god's hand. Here it is. Now that he thought about it, the reason he got the book was because he went to the university. If he didn't tell him to research specifically, if the man god didn't tell him to research the displacement incident specifically, he would have never found the book. So it wasn't just saying go to the university, it was go there and research this. And then you'll fix your ED. But specifically told him, research this. Rudeus in the end didn't get anything from the displacement incident. He never figured it out. The one goal man god said to go there for, in Rudeus's mind, he didn't accomplish. But in actuality, he did, because he found the book. That was all the only reason he told him to go there. If he didn't research the displacement incident, he would have never found the book, facing the labyrinth without its assistance. The man god's words always seemed to belay a deeper meaning. He said not to go to Prapon and hook up with Lilia and Presena. It felt he purposely said those things to stir him up. I love when this stuff connects the way that you think it's going to connect. Again, not that I'm like some genius that thought this up. I'm not saying I'm like super genius here that I predicted this, but it's just one of those moments where you think, gosh, that seemed to be this reason. And then later on, Rudeus goes, yeah, it seems to be for that reason. It's because the writer's so good at telling the story that you can connect the dots and that you do think like Rudeus. I love it when it does that. It pays off for knowing the mindset of Rudeus. You're able to grab intent. If the man god hadn't said that, or told him to go to Begaret, Rudeus felt he might have chosen to stay. Rudeus was rebellious to the man god, and Sylphie was important to him. Now, Rudeus wouldn't have ignored the situation. He said that I'd probably send Bodigadi or Rajerd or Soldat in my stead. If you can find Bodigadi. If you can find him. Maybe the man god had taken all that into account. He did, of course, send Rudeus to that school to gather the necessary things for rescuing Zenith. But I still think there is a side of it that he also wanted him to see Nanahoshi. I'm still holding to that. It's essentially a two birds, one stone thing. It doesn't have to be one or the other. It could be both. Just like saving Lilia and meeting Nanahoshi is for two aspects. Rudeus started to wonder again who the man god was. What he wanted Rudeus to do. And if it was really true that the man god just enjoyed watching him. As usual, Rudeus had no clue what was going through his head, but it was no mistake that he was an ally. Hold on, Rudeus. Whoa, pull the rings back, Rudeus. I think at this point, he's just kind of overjoyed in the idea that this is exactly what I needed. So he is an ally. Careful. Rudeus wondered if he would appear in his dreams that night. He thought that he would probably have to give him some sort of offering when he went this time, though he didn't know what the man god's preferences were, what he would like, or if he would even like whatever he gave him. However, the man god didn't appear in his dreams that night, obviously. Obviously. The man god is such a troll. The man god is such a troll. Don't trust him, Rudeus. I really do truly think that the man god is like one of the most fascinating aspects of Rudeus' story. It's just, he's the character that is just constantly creating question marks for me. I'm always trying to figure out what his actual intent is. I mean, from accepting Rajerd's help from the very beginning, it had question marks around that. And as I go along, I'm starting to create more question marks. And I think this is sort of the coolest moment in that whole thing, in that it creates this question mark of when he says one thing, but may actually intend another thing. You can go all the way back to Rajerd himself. Again, even if I didn't ask Rajerd for his help, he still would have followed us, but you wouldn't have formed a bond with him. Go even further than that, he may never have helped Norn and Aisha get all the way up to Rinoa if he didn't know who you were. There's all these little kind of things that you start to kind of put together of maybe there's like a little bit of a chain reaction here, and the original intent isn't that. I think even at some point, Rudeus even questions, maybe the man god is just using me to get Rajerd. Maybe the whole reason was to get Rajerd, to help Rajerd. Rudeus never does really have the mindset that he is the center of some sort of epic story. I'm not the main character mentality, which is always really cool about him as a character and so refreshing to anything else out there for these types of shows. Again, helping Lilia and Aisha. Yes, I think it was the intent was for him to run into Nanahoshi and Orsted to meet Nanahoshi. And that was my whole thought, that as part of the reason why he went to Rinoa isn't just the book, but also to help Nanahoshi. I think the man god wants him to get close to Nanahoshi because Nanahoshi knows Orsted, and they're apparently adversaries. It all keeps connecting, and I really like it. I just eat it up. I even think now I start to question if things like Norn, maybe Norn is a part of this whole thing as well. Maybe the man god set up things so that Norn would have to push Rudius. Because again, Rudius says, I probably wouldn't have gone if he hadn't put this into my mind. But what was the other aspect? What was the other catalyst to him finally going to Begarit? Norn. Maybe the man god wanted Norn to be pushed to do what she's currently doing, training herself and getting better, becoming the next Millis, essentially. But yeah, anyways, that is chapter 2, and I'm unfortunately going to stop it there. I know, I'm sorry. At least I did 2 chapters. Everybody thought that I was going to do 1 chapter per Mushoku Monday, but as per usual, I don't want to push myself too much here. And I really do think that 3 and 4 are going to go together really, really well. And maybe with the fact that there is so much combat that I'm going to be condensing, because I'm not going to say like every spell and how it does this and that. It might be able to get 5 in there as well. I'm not going to make any promises, but we'll see. Like I said, I'm trying to keep this at a good pace. And additionally, got some crazy stuff coming up here soon, so I gotta pre-plan a lot of stuff. So I'm gonna probably do a lot of pre-recording just so I can keep things rolling and keep you guys entertained. Hopefully, you're entertained. But yeah, there was a lot of really cool stuff in here, though. I love at the very beginning, like chapter 1, the birth of labyrinths. I mean, just the aspect of why there's so many labyrinths in the area is so fascinating to me. And again, technically, it does hint at the aspects of what creates a labyrinth. Again, we have the perspective that labyrinths are living, breathing things. It's almost as if Refusion is trying to sprinkle in aspects to explain how a labyrinth is birthed. Because again, it's a living, breathing thing, and my mindset is that having these monsters go deep inside of it and die and have, maybe it's like a large amount of mana of monsters going down inside of a tunnel or cave, and then at some point dying is almost like creating a heart within it. Having so much mana within there that's creating a disturbance. Technically, animals turn to monsters because of a large amount of mana. So why not to say that a cave can turn into essentially a monster, a labyrinth, is because there's a lot of mana down there. Because these monsters go down there and die. But again, also hinting at the aspect of maybe consuming monsters, which are technically mana-infused animals, can technically alter your being, yourself. That's an interesting aspect to get into. What if Rudy starts to wolf down a bunch of monster meat just to get more powerful? You never know. Because again, that kind of plays into what I thought about Rajerd. What is Rajerd doing? He's always traveling and killing monsters and technically feasting off them, because Rajerd, especially when he was on the Demon Continent, couldn't just go into a town and go, hey, can I have some eggs so I can make some, some breakfast? They're like, no, get out of here. You're dead end. But yeah, I think at the core... One of the other things I didn't really get too much into, I hit on here and there, but I think these 2 chapters kind of encompass, and I felt a little bit of that getting into the coming chapters, is this idea that Rudius always doesn't really see people the way he really should see people. And you really always see it whenever he's reintroduced to people. When he sees Paul again, all he's thinking about was their last meeting. It's going to go bad. It's going to go bad. It's going to go bad. I can't believe, I hope I don't say the wrong thing. He's not realizing how much Paul loves him and regrets what happened. And so he makes these thought processes that assumes Paul's going to hate him. Again, not realizing you guys made a connection last time. The last time you guys seen each other, you made a father-son connection. Why don't you remember that? Why don't you remember everything that happened after you fought? Why do you only think about when you fought? And additionally, it's the same thing with all the other characters. Yes, technically with Geese, he has this different perspective of Geese than everybody else does. He sees him differently. And now he's seeing essentially the Geese that is the party leadership, the one that is making all the calls. A completely different person. The way that he sees Ellen Elise is different than what everybody else sees. I don't think that's an incorrect. I think that's actually a positive that everybody else doesn't see. Everybody else sees the old Ellen Elise, really. And yes, technically, Lilia. Lilia, it was a heartbreak moment for me. I really do truly, it puzzles me the most because, and again, I do attribute that to Lilia herself. She wants to be seen as the maid. Norn calls her the maid because Lilia wants to be the maid. She's always professional. She's always doing her job and her duty, and she's burning into the head of Aisha to be the same. Never really accepting that she is a part of the family. The moment that Rudius
changed Zenith's mind. Zenith accepted Lilia as a family member. You are part of the family now. And then Paul accepted Lilia. You are my wife. Eventually bringing her in as a second wife. But Lilia always wanted to be seen as a maid. And again, even though Rudius and Lilia connected after he saved them, it was still in the presence of professionalism. He even says that himself. She was a maid. She always presented herself as that. And so there is a disconnect that always happens around Lilia, and it makes me really excited for a possible moment where you'll finally have Lilia go, all right, stop. All right, I got to stop doing this. I am a part of the family. I kind of joked about the fact that the whole reason that Lilia went with Paul to the Beggar Continent is because she's got to go get her wife. I literally do see the two of them as just the wives. They don't care about Paul. There's just the two of them taking care of Nor and Aisha. I really do hope we have a moment where Lilia finally kind of just breaks as pretty much a mother-in-law. And they don't have to see Lilia as a mom, but see her as, he does technically see her now as family, which was really odd because technically when he first ran to Aisha and Norn again, he's seen them as sisters. These are my sisters. He accepted them as sisters. Granted, Aisha and Norn are technically blood related through Paul, Norn through Zenith as well, but he never had a problem connecting to them the second time around. Yes, he had his issues with communicating to them and everything, but he's still seen them as, these are my sisters. And through their hardships they face, he grows even closer to them. These are my sisters. I will do anything to protect Norn. I want Aisha to be spoiled. He wants to treat them as sisters. Aisha's offering herself to him, and he's like, no, you're my sister. That's all I see you as. Why isn't it the same with Lilia? It's never, seemingly tragically, the same with Lilia. So we'll see. I hope one day. Again, technically he does say we're family to Paul. But again, somewhere in the mind there, he doesn't seem like he says that. I don't know what to say to her. She's never been a mom to me. She's always been a maid. It's just the conversation is, yeah, I can talk about family. Never in his mind is he saying that Lilia is family. He just says at some point, no, we're family. So I don't know. It's a troubling thing. I forgot to mention it, but yes, I'm curious if they'll ever actually get into the party that spotted Zenith. I'm curious if they'll actually bump into them. Because again, they say that they went down in there again, and they never have heard from them again. So the assumption is they went in there and died, or they're trapped. They hit a teleporter and they're stuck somewhere, and they're trying to figure out how to get out. Maybe possibly Rudius and the rest of his party will run into them trying to find Zenith. The reason why I'm stuck on it is because they're saying specifically that this party found Zenith. How do they know what Zenith looks like? How do they know that somebody was looking for Zenith and that's the Zenith? Unless they said at some point maybe Geese was in a bar and then this group was talking over here and they're like, yeah, we ran into somebody down the labyrinth over there and she's stuck. And then Geese is like, well, who'd you find? And she's like, well, it's this girl that looks like this. And he's like, oh, that's Zenith. That's the only reason I can see that being a insignificant random group. Now, if it's a group that is significant to the story, like it's somebody that we know from the past, somebody that we've run into before, and it's an actual party that's going to be significant to the story, probably a group they're going to find in there. Unfortunately, possibly dead, hopefully not, but I'll be curious if they're alive, who it might be. I can't really think of anything off the top of my head, except for maybe a group that would be significant to somebody that we've known before. It would be somebody like, I don't know, probably Soldat's group. I don't think it would be Ghislaine or Edis because, again, they're presumably still up there training. And technically, they would probably say, oh, no, it's Ghislaine. Ghislaine found her. Other than that, unfortunately, I can't really think of anybody else it might be. Again, that's story-specific that we know. But we'll see. Maybe it's Body Gotti. Though I think they would know if they would say something. Yeah, this big demon dude would found her. Maybe Body Gotti. That's where Body Gotti went. I mean, that is technically something that has kind of been tickling the back of my head is on the question mark of what happened to Body Gotti. And I sort of wonder if it has something to do with Body Gotti talking to Rizard. Like, that conversation, something happened. And it could be that, yes, Rizard told him that, yeah, Paul's down there right now looking for his rest of his family. And then Body Gotti's like, all right, I'll go handle it. I'll go handle it. I doubt it, again, because there would be word going around that a big demon guy suddenly showed up in the town or something.
The last thing I want to talk about before I conclude is the aspects around Roxy herself. Again, this stuff just breaks my heart because, again, I love Roxy, but there was an element to the whole reveal around Roxy that sort of got me. First of all was the aspect of how he jumps to conclusions. I really do, I feel for him. I mean, everybody can relate to this aspect that you get, let's say you get a phone call and somebody's crying on the other end and you know who the person is because it came up on your caller ID and you're like, why are you crying right now? And your mind's going a million directions of what happened, they get in a car wreck. That happens a lot. If most people have had experience where somebody calls and says they got in a car wreck and you're like, immediately, are you okay? Are you okay? What happened? And you immediately think of the worst. You think of the worst every time. Before the person even opens their mouth, you're immediately thinking of all the possibilities, and typically it's always going to be going to the worst. And Refugio did a really good job of portraying that, and the idea that Rudeus is like, crap, the first thing I could think of, the worst thing possible, death. He immediately thinks of the worst thing possible, death. And even still, he's like, I don't want to know. Stop talking. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. But I do want to hear it. I ask anyways. What happened? You still want to know. You still want that conclusion to see if what you think is right. It's gut-wrenching. But additionally, the aspect of how he feels so differently about Roxy being in danger than Zenith. And I do think there is a side of it of him assuming the worst. It's been long enough that he's kind of accepting the idea that Zenith is probably dead. Unfortunately, she's probably dead. I've come to grips with that. But additionally, again, I do believe that it hits harder in the idea of something happening to Roxy rather than Zenith. Because who's been in Rudeus's mind his entire life? Roxy. Yes, he was born from Zenith, but again, he had the mind of a 40-year-old going, oh crap, where am I at? Why am I here? Holy crap, this isn't my family, whatever, fantasy world, weird, magic, cool stuff. Never relying on his mother, never connecting to his mother. She was just Zenith. This lady that in this world birthed him, but it's not my mom. He was so focused over here, focused on this, that, not his family. Again, over his journey, he's learning about his family. He's learning about how much he cares for his family. He had his connecting point for Paul, had his connecting point for Aisha, Norn, and even partially Lilia, but never Zenith. He's never really connected to Zenith really well. In Zenith's chapter, we see a brief sign of that connection, but never much. Roxy was important to him because Roxy broke his 40-year-old curse. Because if you count like his previous life and technically like a segment of his new life, somewhere upwards of 30 years, I would probably guesstimate with both worlds. I think he's actually stated at some point, I just forget. She broke that curse, and that meant everything to him because that was a hell he was stuck in. He was stuck in a hell, and she reached down and pulled him out of it, which means so much to him. And again, technically, after everything happened with him going up into the north, he actually turned this fetish for the Pantsu into an actual religion. She is literally his religion. And so again, technically means a lot more to him than Zenith. So I don't necessarily blame him for that mindset, even though it really, really hurts. But anyways, that is our first steps into volume 12 of Mushoku Tensei Jobless Reincarnation. I hope you guys enjoyed this journey so far. As per usual, I apologize for not having the old 2-hour-long episodes. Eventually I'm gonna get over that, and because I think most people don't mind. I know you all want everything, but I know that most of you are like, it's cool. But hope you guys will join me for next week as we get into chapter 3 and onward. I greatly appreciate you guys' support. Thank you everybody that dropped by for the premiere. Everybody in the chat. Hey chat, thanks for coming by. Everybody that leaves comments, if the comments are enabled. I don't know. There's a possibility that volume 12, we might just disable it for the entire volume from what I'm hearing. But we'll see. I'll let the mods choose as usual. But everybody that hits the like button down below, if you have not hit it, make sure to hit it. I greatly appreciate it. Thank you everybody for checking out this video. I hope you guys enjoyed, as always, Mushoku Mondays. I greatly appreciate your guys' support and all of your kind words and everything. And additionally, yes, greatly appreciate everybody that supports the channel through our Patreon, tips link, super thanks, all the people that are members of the channel itself.
I greatly, greatly appreciate you guys' support. We got some new members. We got some new Patreon supporters. It means a great deal to me, and it makes a huge difference, your guys' support, no matter how much it is. And yes, for the members, you get some great Mushoku Tensei Jobless Reincarnation emotes. So, with all that said, greatly appreciate it, guys. And until the next Mushoku Mondays, you'll have a fantastic one. During their journeys, Rudius did start talk to, but it was easy to enjoy them if you suspended it. But they were easy to enjoy if you suspended disbelief. But they were easy to enjoy with most would find better profits and safer travels. Most would find better profits and safer. So I'm sure he'll hear if we go out and poking around using it. So I'm sure he'll hear of it if we go around poking using his name. So I'm sure he'll hear of it if we go. Okay, let's start asking about Paul and Geist. Okay, let's start asking about you two sure seem to be you two sure seem to be close. You two sure. Why can't I say this? You two sure seem to be no. You two sure to be. Rias shook his head. They had a similar communication mix-up the last time they turned up. Rias shook his head. They had a similar communication mix-up when Rias shook his head. They had a similar communication. Rias shook his head. They had a similar communication. Rias shook his head. They had a similar communication. Rias shook his head. They had a similar. Why can't I say this? Separate from his usual. He planned on keeping his usual casual speech separate from his usual habits of addressing. Elise. Oh, looks like I missed a touching reunion, eh? Oh, looks like I missed a touching reunion, eh? God damn this voice. Oh, looks like I missed a touching reunion, eh? I need to double check this voice. You look intelligent. He was a magician capable of intermediate earth magic. He was a magician capable of intermediate tier earth magic. So he wasn't a magician, and he starts to do that with chapter. Is Aisha performing acceptably? I've always told her to show difference for Norn. I've always told her to show difference for Norn. Why can't I say Mistress Norn?